Fundamental scientific discoveries do not come as a result of logical reasoning, but as flashes of inspiration, like knowledge taken out of nowhere. The same is true for great inventions. Good music is not just composed from a collection of notes, but comes as if on its own. Great works of art are created not as a result of mastering a technique, but out of inspiration. A work of art that has been painted by someone who has mastered a particular technique will not necessarily become a masterpiece. It becomes a masterpiece because of what lies outside the boundaries of excellent technical performance. Poetry that moves the soul is not a result of the logical sorting of rhymes, but because it comes from the same place, from the depths of the soul. Art that is based on inspiration and enlightenment has nothing to do with the mind. It is only later that the mind makes the products of such creation as its own. For example, the mind can make a perfect copy of an old masterpiece, but it is not capable of creating a new one. The mind analyzes data that the subconscious receives from the field of information and wraps this data in symbolic interpretation in the form of a melody, a picture, a poem, a formula, a diagram, etc. We usually do not understand how the subconscious gets access to the field of information. We only witness the manifestation of this access. An example is clairvoyance, the ability to perceive events that have either happened before, are about to happen, or are happening beyond the limits of visual perception. We don't understand the mechanism of these phenomena, so we call them paranormal. Pendulums of fundamental science, not wanting to admit their own powerlessness, don't take paranormal phenomena seriously. However, the fact that we can't explain things doesn't mean they are not true, and we can't just wave them away. There are people who see events in the information field as clearly as if they were happening before them in the material world. Such people have the ability to tune themselves to a specific sector in the space of variations that has already been manifested. For example, to tune into the sector of a missing person, a clairvoyant must look at his photograph or touch an object that belongs to him. Even the police sometimes use the services of clairvoyance. Not everyone can see so clearly, and so mistakes are made. There are two reasons for these mistakes. The first is when a clairvoyant gets tuned to a sector that has not been and will not be realized. Different sectors, depending on their relative distances from each other, can differ either greatly or barely at all in scripts and decorations. The second reason why a clairvoyant can make a mistake is that he can easily misinterpret the data he sees. For example, ancient foretellers and prophets, when looking at unfamiliar and strange scenes from the future, interpreted them in their own way, according to their level of knowledge. Consequently, their prophecies were imprecise. Whether you believe this or not is your choice, not is it important. Transurfing is just a model that allows us to use the laws of the world for our own interests. It is not meant to be the description of the world's structure. Transurfing is also not a stone monument with an inscription that reads, "Here is exactly where the heart of the problem is." Nevertheless, the fact remains that information from the space of variations somehow reaches us in the form of hints, visions, enlightenment, and signs. And if possible, we must try to grasp their meaning. Knowledge out of nowhere. Only a small select number of people can clearly read data from the field of information. Everyone else gets only echoes in the form of passing premonitions and vague knowledge. When the search for new solutions in realized sectors yields no results, the subconscious can sometimes slip into an unrealized sector where data is not enveloped in symbolic interpretation. When this happens, consciousness perceives it as vague and unclear information. But if the brain is able to grasp the essence of this information, you get enlightened and a clear understanding comes to you. There are many ambiguities and contradictions in the workings of consciousness, the mind, and the subconscious, the soul. If our mind understood everything that the soul wanted to tell it, humankind would have received direct access to the field of information a long time ago. It's hard to imagine the heights that civilization might have reached if this was the case. But it's not only that the mind doesn't know how to listen, it's that it doesn't even want to. Man's attention is ordinarily preoccupied either with objects in the external world or with inner thoughts and emotional feelings about those objects. The inner monologue almost never stops, even though it is under the mind's control. The mind doesn't listen to the weak signals of the soul. Instead, it authoritatively repeats over and over whatever it is preoccupied with. When the mind thinks, it operates in categories. It classifies qualities of visible objects in the materialized sectors. In other words, it thinks with the help of well-established labels, symbols, words, concepts, diagrams, rules, and so on. It then tries to place all information into those appropriately labeled files. There are labels for everything that exists in the world. The sky is blue, water is wet, birds fly, tigers are dangerous, winter is cold. Because information in unrealized sectors doesn't have any labels, the mind perceives it as incomprehensible knowledge. But if a new label can be put on a piece of knowledge, or if the perception can be explained in the framework of an existing explanation, a discovery is made. It's always difficult to come up with an explanation for something entirely new. Imagine a man who hears music for the first time. Music is also information in the form of sounds. When the mind receives this information, it knows but doesn't understand. There is no name or label for it. Understanding comes later, after the mind has heard music many times and is familiar with all the designations and objects associated with music. Notes, songs, instruments, musicians, and so on. But when man heard music for the first time, it was very real knowledge and at the same time an incomprehensible mystery. In other words, his mind knew it was experiencing something but could not identify exactly what it was experiencing. Try to explain the following definition to a small child. Milk is white. The child is only just starting to use abstract categories, thus he'll ask you a bunch of questions. Yes, he knows what milk is, but what is white? It's a color. And what is a color? It's a property of objects. And what's a property? And what's an object? And so on forever and ever. It would be easier not to explain what color is, but to show objects of different colors. Then the child's mind can use the abstract category of color to label the parameter where the objects differ. This is how he puts labels and definitions on everything around him, and then learns to think using those definitions. In contrast to the mind, however, the soul doesn't use labels. How then can the soul explain to the mind that milk is white? From the time when the mind begins to think using abstract categories, its connection to the soul slowly begins to atrophy. The soul doesn't use categories. It doesn't think and doesn't talk. It feels and knows. It cannot express what it knows with words or symbols. Therefore, the mind can never agree with the soul. Suppose the soul is tuned to an unrealized sector and discovers something that does not yet exist in the material world. How can it bring this information to the mind? Moreover, the mind is constantly busy with its chatter. It thinks that everything can be intelligently explained, and it is constantly keeping all information under control. The mind receives only vague signals from the soul, signals it cannot always identify with the help of its categories. The soul's ambiguous feelings and knowledge are drowned out by the loud thoughts of the mind. But if the mind's control weakens a little, intuitive feelings and knowledge can break through into consciousness. This breakthrough can appear in the form of a vague premonition. The mind gets distracted, and in that moment you sense a feeling or some knowledge of the soul. This is called the rustling of the morning stars, the voice without words, thoughtfulness without thoughts, sound without volume. You understand something, but vaguely. You are not thinking, you feel it intuitively. Everyone has at some point in their life experienced this kind of intuition. For example, you feel that someone's coming right now, or something is about to happen, or you simply know something without being able to explain it. The mind is constantly busy generating thoughts, and the intuitions of the soul are literally drowned out by this thought mixer. As a result, intuitive knowledge is hard to access. If we could stop the constant churning of our thoughts and simply contemplate emptiness, we would hear the rustling of the morning stars, the wordless inner voice. The soul can find answers to many questions if we can only listen to its silent voice. Teaching the soul to purposefully tune itself to unrealized sectors and forcing the mind to listen to what the soul wants to tell it is not easy. You have to start with something simple. For example, the soul has two distinct feelings, a sense of inner peace and a sense of inner discomfort. The mind interprets these feelings as, I feel good and I feel bad. I'm confident and I'm worried. I like and I don't like. With every step you take in life, decisions must be made to do something or to do something else. Material manifestation is moving through the space of variations, and as a result, you get what you call your life. Depending on your thoughts and actions, particular sectors are being realized. The soul has access to the field of information. Somehow it sees what lays ahead in the approaching but not yet realized sectors. If the soul tunes into a sector that has not yet become reality, it knows what is waiting there, something nice or something bad. These feelings of the soul are perceived by the mind as vague sensations of inner peace or inner discomfort. The soul often knows what is awaiting it and tries with the weak voice of intuition to inform the mind. However, the mind almost never listens to the soul, or at least doesn't attach significance to these vague gut feelings. The mind is trapped by pendulums. It is too busy solving problems, convinced that its rational actions are correct. The mind makes resolute decisions, governed by logical reasoning and common sense. However, it's well known that sensible reasoning in no way guarantees a right solution. The soul, in contrast to the mind, doesn't think. It feels and knows. Therefore, it doesn't make mistakes. How often do you hear people suddenly say, "But I knew that nothing good would come of it"? The task is to learn to determine what your soul is telling your mind in the moment of decision making. It is not that difficult to do. You just have to tell your overseer to pay attention to the state of your soul. Suppose you are making some kind of decision. Your mind is completely trapped by the pendulum or preoccupied with solving a problem. To hear the rustling of the morning stars, you only have to remember that you need to pay attention to your soul's condition. It seems too simple, but the only problem is in paying attention to your own feelings. Unfortunately, we are prone to trust reasonable arguments more than our own feelings. We have forgotten how to pay attention to the state of our soul. Here's something that may help. The next time you mentally review the possible solutions to a situation, notice that the mind is being guided not by feelings, but by reasoning. Try then to remember and notice what you are feeling. Does something about the situation put you on alert or upset you? Is there something that feels dangerous or something that you don't like? After you make a decision, order your mind to be quiet for a moment and ask yourself, do I feel good or bad about this? Then pick a different solution and again ask yourself, do I feel good or bad about this? If you don't have an explicit feeling, it means that your mind is still a poor listener. Let your overseer force you to pay attention to the state your soul is in more often. However, it is also possible that the answer to your question is ambiguous. In that case, you shouldn't rely on such imprecise data. The only thing remaining is to act according to the suggestions your mind is making or to simplify the question. If you are able to get an explicit answer, yes, this is good for me, or no, this is bad for me, it means you have listened to the rustling of the morning stars. Now you know the answer. It doesn't mean that you will act according to the dictates of the soul, because we are not always free to act the way we wish, but at least you will know what you can expect in the unrealized sector. The asker, the offended, and the warrior. In most situations, there are two extremes of human behavior: going with the flow, like a little paper boat with no will of your own, or rowing against the flow, stubbornly insisting on your own way. If you were just sitting around, not taking any initiative or striving to achieve anything, then life directs you. You become a puppet of pendulums, and they determine your fate at their discretion. In this case, you refuse to choose your own destiny. Your choice is to have a predetermined destiny. Let it be whatever it is. What will be, will be. According to such a condition, you claim that you can't escape your fate, and you are correct because there happens to be a destiny like that in the space of variations. Having made this choice, you can only complain helplessly about your fate and place your hope on higher powers. Having put your destiny in others' hands, you submit to asking for charity for living your life, or you appeal to pendulums or to some higher power. Pendulums force you to work, and you spend your whole life cringing before them, getting only a few crumbs to live on in return. You naively appeal to higher powers, but they don't care about you. In effect, you give away any responsibility for your own destiny, saying, "Everything is in God's hands." And if that is the case, all you need to do is ask nicely, and as God is merciful, He will give it to you. Mountains and valleys, rivers and oceans, oh the sky, oh the earth, I bow before your power. I am filled with reverence and belief. I believe that you will help me buy my morning newspaper. You probably think a morning newspaper is too exaggerated of an example. Not at all, because to great higher powers, there is no difference between a morning newspaper and a grand palace. Anything is possible for them. There is a Russian joke about a man lying on his couch praying, "Oh God, help me get rich. I know you can do it. I believe in your greatness. I put my hopes in you and your mercy." The Lord replies in vexation, "Listen, dude, you could at least buy a lottery ticket." It is very comfortable to decline all responsibility for your life and at the same time to wallow in your inner importance. Yes, importance, because you are imagining yourself to be such an important person to whom God devotes all His majesty and mercy. But God has already given man too much. He has already given him freedom of choice, but man, due to his infantile nature, doesn't accept this gift and is constantly dissatisfied. Infantile man finds justification in the fact that the way towards the goal is strewn with obstacles. In fact, there is always something in the way of a man's goal, and that something is pendulums and balancing forces which come as a result of creating the excess potential of importance. The alternative to asking for charity or appealing to higher powers is to feel offended, to express dissatisfaction with your life, and to demand things that you feel are your right. But by expressing your demands, you bring even more harm to your destiny. As an example, a man comes to a picture gallery. He doesn't like the exhibition, and he considers it his right to express dissatisfaction. He stamps his feet, makes threats, demands that the exhibition be taken down, and starts destroying the objects around him. Naturally, there is some kind of reprisal for his actions. He then gets more offended and actively rants and raves. He thinks other people and situations should accommodate his every whim. It doesn't occur to him that he is only a guest in this world. There is also a third category of person who, instead of appealing for help or feeling offended, decides to struggle against all odds to get what he wants. He makes the choice that my destiny is in my hands. Such a person becomes a warrior and begins to struggle for his place in the world. Taking a hard stand, he engages in war with pendulums, gets drawn into ongoing competition, and elbows his way forward. His entire life becomes a continuous struggle for existence. He has chosen to struggle, and this alternative also exists in the space of variations. False humility and dissatisfaction both make you dependent on pendulums. Therefore, when you submit to asking for help and appealing to higher powers, you create excess potential through guilt and voluntarily give yourself away to the hands of manipulators. By virtue of submitting, you believe that you are condemned to ask and wait and hope that someone will give you something. On the other hand, when you feel offended, you create excess potential in the form of dissatisfaction, which turns balancing forces against you. In this way, you indirectly ruin your fate. Having chosen the battle, the warrior takes a more productive stand, but his life is hard and consumes a lot of his energy. No matter how much he resists, he gets himself more and more enveloped in the spiderweb. It seems to him that he is struggling for his destiny, while in fact he is spending his energy in vain. Sometimes he gains a victory, but at what price? His victory is there for all to see, and everyone sees how incredibly difficult it is to win the crown of victory. And once more, society's notion that to achieve something you have to be courageous and persistent and work hard for it gets reinforced. This social opinion is actually formed by pendulums which feed off the excess potential of inner and outer importance. When a goal seems difficult to reach, this is outer importance talking. When it seems reachable only by someone who possesses outstanding qualities, it is inner importance talking. In both cases, the warrior may even be allowed to get to the finish line and feel satisfied, but he will be fleeced without understanding that he has spent his energy more on fulfilling the demands of pendulums than on reaching his goal. To free yourself from pendulums, you have to abandon inner and outer importance. If you do this, obstacles on the way to your goal will simply self-destruct, leaving you able not to ask, not to demand, and not to struggle, but simply to go and take, which is the subject of the rest of this book. Going with the flow. Those who appeal for help and those who feel offended by their circumstances unwillingly go with the flow of life. The warrior, on the other hand, tries to fight against the flow, and everyone to a degree takes on each of these roles from time to time. Yet in none of these cases is anyone free. Try to imagine yourself not resisting the flow and not causing any extra turbulence, but simply going along with the flow without will, like a little paper boat. Instead, you are intentionally moving in agreement with the flow, adjusting to things as they happen, keeping your chosen direction. You are behind the steering wheel. Information in the space of variations is stationary, like a matrix, but at the same time, the information structure is organized into chains of cause and effect. These chains give birth to the flow of variations. First, you must correctly choose the general direction of this flow, and the direction is determined by your goal and the means for attaining it. After choosing the direction, you must rely on the flow as much as possible and make good decisions so as not to deviate from it. Of course, the mind is easily prevented from making efficient decisions because it is constantly under the pressure of artificially created importance. Internal and external importance are, in essence, the main sources of our problems. To the extent that we allow importance to enter, balancing forces appear like rapids and whirlpools on the way through the flow. If we can throw off importance, the flow turns into a much calmer river. The question of whether you should surrender yourself to the flow is also a question of importance. External importance forces the mind to look for complicated solutions to simple problems, whereas inner importance convinces the mind that it is reasoning soundly and making the only possible correct decision. When you throw importance away, the mind breathes freely because it gets released from artificially created problems and the influence of pendulums. It is then able to make better, more objective decisions. The beauty of this lies in the fact that the mind doesn't need great intellect to operate once it frees itself from the burden of importance. The flow of variations already contains the solutions to all your problems. More importantly, however, the majority of all your problems are artificially created by the mind. A restless mind is continuously experiencing the pull and push of pendulums and trying to solve all its problems at the same time. But its strong-willed decisions are in most cases futile. Most problems, especially small ones, automatically solve themselves if you don't disturb the flow of variations. If the solution already exists in space, you don't even need a great intellect to find it. As long as you don't interfere with the flow of variations, a solution will come by itself, and it will be the optimal solution, which already lies in the structure of the information field. This is because cause and effect chains create separate streams in the flow of variations. These streams are the optimal ways in which causes and effects happen. Everything exists in the space of variations, but only the optimal or the least energy-consuming variations are likely to be realized. Nature does not waste energy. All its processes move by the way of least energy expenditure, and streams of variations are organized the same way. This is where optimal solutions lie. But because the mind is usually trapped by pendulums and acts in their interests, it is constantly getting out of the optimal streams by creating confusion and looking for complicated solutions to simple problems. Knowing about these streams in the flow of variations is a luxury, a gift for the mind, because each problem contains coded keys to its solution. The first key is to move along the path of least resistance. We usually look for complicated solutions because they present obstacles, and obstacles, of course, must be overcome with great effort. We have to turn this around and cultivate the habit of choosing the simplest solution for whatever problem comes up. In general, the solution is simply this. In accordance with the principle of going with the flow, try to do everything in the easiest and simplest way possible. The optimal variations of any actions are organized in streams that are formed as chains of cause and effect. When you make the decision to take the next step in your action, you choose the next link in the chain, and you need to determine the best link. In most cases, you will think that you are making a logical decision based on common sense and everyday experience. The mind, however, is strong-willed and thinks it can calculate and explain everything. But this is not the case. The problem is that the mind cannot always choose the optimal variation because the cause and effect chains of the flow don't always match its logical constructions. No matter how hard you try, you will rarely choose the optimal action if you use only logical conclusions. The mind is usually under the pressure of stress, troubles, depression, or increased activity, and because of this, pendulums are constantly pulling at it. In response, the mind is always reacting forcefully and mounting a frontal attack on the external world. To correctly choose the next chain of the flow, you need only to free yourself from the strings of the pendulum and follow the stream. Take a balanced position. Minimize the level of importance that you are giving to the situation and do not create excess potential. When you are in a state of balance with the surrounding world, you simply go with the flow. You can then see a multitude of signs that will guide you. Instead of participating in events, you let them go and become an observant bystander. Not a slave, not a master, simply someone who performs actions. When your mind tries to make reasonable, strong-willed decisions, pull yourself back. Rent yourself out and observe events from the sidelines. Everything is a lot easier than it seems. Yield to this simplicity. It is the mind that brings you to the precipice of a waterfall, not the flow of variations. For example, you have to find something you really need in a shop, but you don't know exactly where this thing is. The mind suggests the most reasonable, but often the most complicated option. You go around half the city, but in the end, you find the item in a shop close to your house. If the importance of the problem had been lower, the mind would not have looked for a complicated solution. Here is another example. There is an entire to-do list in your hands. What should you choose to do first and what later? You don't have to think about it. Simply do the things you feel like doing. Move together with the flow. Untie your mind from the influence of pendulums. This doesn't mean turning into a helpless little paper boat on the waves. It means paddling gently and smoothly. Each time you need to find a solution, ask yourself, What's the simplest way of looking for the solution? For instance, if you have a long to-do list, don't attribute too much importance to how you will get it done. Just start with the things you feel like doing and go on from there. When someone or something distracts you or leads you astray, don't be in a hurry to resist or avoid it. Instead, rent yourself out and watch what happens next. Again, just ask yourself, what is the simplest way to do this? Allow things to happen in the simplest way. If someone suggests something or imposes their point of view, don't be in a hurry to reject them or enter an argument. Let your mind remain flexible and open to alternatives. Observe first, then act. Let the game develop as much as possible on its own, under your observation. Let your life go with the flow, and you will see how much easier it gets. Guiding signs. But how do you know where the flow is going? And how can you distinguish a normal turn in the flow from something harmful? One way is with the help of tangible signs that the world is constantly giving us. The most familiar type of signs is omens, good omens and bad omens. If you see a rainbow, it's a good omen. If you see a black cat, misfortune awaits. These are examples of established superstitions, but they don't always come true. Why? Because they depend on what you believe. If you expect something to come, your thoughts bring corresponding changes to the parameters of thought radiation, and you are put onto a life track that corresponds to those parameters. You get exactly what you want or what you are afraid of. You yourself allow the possibility in your script. Omens by themselves cannot serve as laws or rules. Why is it that a black cat is a standard bad sign for everybody? Put another way, how in the world can a black cat have an influence on your life? The influence is not the cat, but your attitude to the omen. If you believe in omens, they shape the events of your life. If you sort of believe in omens, their influence is less, but still there nonetheless. If you don't believe in them at all and don't pay any attention to them, they do not have any influence whatsoever on your life. It's all very simple. You get what you allow into your script. Although omens may not affect the events in your life, they can serve as guiding signs. For example, a black cat itself cannot have any direct influence, but it can serve as a sign, a warning of something that will take place on your way in the flow of variations. The question then is, what signs can be considered guiding signs? After all, when you make up your mind to monitor everything around you, you see the signs everywhere. How do you interpret them? The only thing you can really do is take the sign into account, increase your level of awareness, and be more careful. Guiding signs indicate a possible turn in the flow of variations. They herald an event that will bring substantial changes into the flow of life. If you expect some sort of turn, even an insignificant one, then a sign can appear that signals it's coming. A sign may also appear if an unexpected turn is coming in the near future. Changes that happen may seem insignificant, but you nonetheless feel that something is different. There is a qualitative difference that you notice, either consciously or unconsciously, as if something is not quite the same as it was a minute ago. Guiding signs appear only when a transfer onto another life track is initiated. You can ignore a separate phenomenon. For example, a crow croaks, but that doesn't put you on alert. You don't feel any qualitative difference, which means you were on the same life track as before. But if you pay attention to the phenomenon and feel something unusual, something odd about the episode, then it could be a sign. Guiding signs are characterized by the fact that they signal your movement onto a substantially different life track. The ones that usually put you on alert happen right after you complete the transfer onto a different track. This is because life tracks are qualitatively different from each other. The difference is hard to put into words. You just have a feeling that something is not quite right. When the transfer has been completed, you feel it intuitively and sometimes even notice obvious changes in how the signs look. As if from the corner of your eye you see or suspect that something new has appeared in your flow of life. Signs act as pointers. They say to you, something has changed, something has happened. A phenomenon that takes place on a current life track usually doesn't put you on alert because it has the same quality as other phenomena on that given track. However, if you ignore everything that happens around you, you won't be able to notice obvious signs either. The transfer to a substantially different track usually happens gradually through intermediate tracks. Signs on intermediate tracks may appear as warnings of varying degrees of severity. Sometimes you ignore the first warning. The transfer continues, then a second warning appears, then a third. And if after that you don't stop, then you find yourself on the final track where something happens. It's difficult to interpret signs precisely and even to know whether something that attracts your attention is a sign or not. All you can do is consider that the world is trying to tell you something. Sometimes it is nice to at least get a hint of what is waiting ahead, especially if it is unpleasant or dangerous. In most cases, you can question a possible sign in terms of a possible yes or no answer. For example, will it work out or not? Will you be successful or not? Will you be able to do it or not? Will it be good or bad? Will it be dangerous or safe? In other words, reduce your interpretation of signs down to one question, the answer to which is either positive or negative. Trying to be more specific than that is not helpful and often just leads to confusion. A sign carries in itself a hint about the quality of an upcoming turn to a different track. If you associate the sign with unpleasant sensations and it fills you with misgivings, distrust, unease, or worry, then it is signaling a negative turn of events. But on the other hand, if your reaction is ambiguous, then there's no point trying to interpret the sign. Your evaluation will be unreliable. So you shouldn't worry about that sign or attribute too much significance to it. However, if you have already paid attention to the sign, then you shouldn't disregard it either. Maybe the sign is a warning that you need to be more careful, or that you ought to change your behavior or stop doing something or choose another direction for your actions. Signs can take varied forms, but in each case, you only need to distinguish whether the meaning behind them is positive or negative. For example, you are in a hurry, but an old lady with a crutch is blocking your way and there's no way you can go around her. What does this mean? More than likely, you will be late. Or there goes your bus, which ordinarily doesn't go very fast, but today, for some reason, it is speeding like crazy. Apparently, you've gone too far in some situation and should be more careful. Another example could be that you were trying to do something that is not really going too well no matter what you do. There is always something in the way and the whole thing is simply not running as smoothly as it should. Maybe this means that it's a dead end and you don't need to go that way at all. The good thing about signs is that they can wake you up before it's too late. For example, they make you realize that you are possibly acting in the interests of a destructive pendulum to your disadvantage. People often make fatal mistakes when under a pendulum spell and only later remember that they had not been aware of their actions at the time, that they could have been more on guard. It's never wrong to maintain a sense of caution, to be aware of what is going on, and to have a sensible view of things. It's also important not to let cautiousness turn into anxiety and suspicion. You have to care about things without worrying about them. You have to rent yourself out and be impeccable in everything you do. Strange as it may seem, some of the clearest and most precise guiding signs are phrases spontaneously uttered by other people. Things they mention in passing without putting much thought into what they are saying. If someone is obviously trying to impose their opinion on you, don't pay much attention to it. But if someone spontaneously mentions something about what you could do in a specific situation, take it very seriously. You can probably recall times where you said something to someone almost automatically without thinking. as though the answer was already there deep inside your consciousness and just fell from your lips, bypassing the analytical mechanism of your mind. Sometimes in these cases, the soul speaks from a realm that is not directly connected to the information field. For example, someone says to you in passing, "Take a scarf with you or you'll catch a cold." If you don't take their advice, you'll regret it later for sure. Or suppose you're concerned with a problem and someone incidentally recommends something that seems unimportant or unrelated. Don't be in a hurry to wave them off. Instead, consider their opinion. Or if you're convinced you're right, but someone accidentally shows you that in this case you are wrong, don't be stubborn. Take a look. Maybe you are futilely going about things the wrong way. Inner discomfort is also a clear sign, a sign from the soul. Yet it is something we often don't pay much attention to, which is ironic because when you have to make a decision, no one knows better than your own soul how to make it. Yes, it's difficult to understand what exactly the soul wants to tell you, but you can learn to distinguish whether the soul likes your mind's decision or not. If you have to make some kind of decision, stop and listen to the rustling of the morning stars. If your mind has already made a decision before you remember about the rustling, try to recall what you were feeling when you made the decision. Simply look back and ask yourself, "I felt good," or "I didn't feel good." If you made the decision reluctantly, if it didn't feel right, then you clearly didn't feel good about it. In that case, if the decision can be altered, go ahead and change it. Determining the level of your inner discomfort is actually not difficult. The difficult thing is to remember in time to listen to your feelings. This is because the mind believes that its reasoning holds authority. It doesn't want to listen to anyone but itself, and its loud roar drowns out the whisper of the soul. The mind also tries to oversubstantiate its case, to find proofs for everything. You stand before a simple choice of yes or no, where the soul tries timidly to say no. The mind is aware of this no, but pretends not to hear it. It then presents persuading arguments based on sensible reasoning to support its yes. To get around this, here's a simple and reliable formula for determining when your soul is saying no. If you have to convince yourself and talk yourself into saying yes, then it means your soul is saying no. When your soul is saying yes, you don't have to talk yourself into anything. It is certainly a good idea to pay attention to the signs your world is showing you. But this does mean you need to look for signs in everything. Oh, the birds are flying high in the sky. What could this mean? Well, they're not afraid of heights, so they are flying high. The point is to keep in mind that phenomena may be guiding signs. As soon as you forget about this, pendulums will take you by the hand and you could become a victim of circumstances. If a desire makes you feel some discomfort and there is the possibility of refusing that desire, then do exactly that. Refuse it. The element of discomfort means that the desire is not coming from the soul but from the mind, and the mind's desires are always imposed by pendulums. The same is true of actions. If you ignore the inner discomfort you are feeling, you may be sorry later. Therefore, if possible, it is better to refuse desires and actions that may evoke discomfort, doubts, apprehension, or feelings of guilt. Doing so will simplify your life and free you from a lot of problems. Remember, too, that only you can notice and interpret your own signs. You don't have to take a course on how to do it. You will understand everything on your own as long as you pay attention to yourself and the world around you, and as long as you refrain from creating excess potential. And remember that the main sign you should pay attention to is your state of inner comfort each time you are about to make a decision. It's really worthwhile to stop and try to listen to the rustling of the morning stars. Letting go of the situation. Knowing about streams in the flow of variations relieves your mind of two overwhelming burdens: the need to rationally solve all problems and the need to always have all situations under control. Of course, these burdens will be lifted only if your mind is willing to relieve itself of them, and for this to happen, the mind needs a more or less rational explanation as to why it is better not to carry these burdens around. These two overwhelming burdens that our mind carries around were imposed on it in childhood. We are constantly taught, use your head. Are you aware of what you're doing? Explain your actions. Do your homework, because only if you learn to use your mind will you ever be able to achieve anything in life. You dummy, won't you ever learn? Our teachers and circumstances made a soldier out of our mind, a soldier ready at any moment to find an explanation, to give an answer to any question, to immediately evaluate situations, to make decisions, to maintain control over what is happening. The mind has been taught to act rationally with common sense. This does not mean you should get rid of common sense. On the contrary, common sense provides you with guidelines for how you should behave in the world to survive. The only problem is that the mind makes the mistake of following these guidelines literally and too strictly. Obsession with common sense prevents the mind from looking around and seeing when things don't agree with guidelines. There's so many things in the world that diverge from common sense, and the best way to navigate them is to rely on the streams in the flow of variations. As it happens, expediency lies in these streams, and that is exactly what the mind is looking for. Streams also follow the way of least resistance. Nature is, in essence, perfect, and there is more expediency and logic in the streams than in the wisest arguments. Besides, no matter how much the mind is convinced that it is thinking sensibly, it can still be mistaken. Even when you follow the flow of variations, the mind will still make mistakes, but there will be fewer of them if the mind lets problems solve themselves without actively interfering with the process. That is called letting go of the situation. You must loosen your grip, lower the amount of control, not disturb the flow, and give more freedom of action to the surrounding world. Pressing and pushing the world is not only useless, but harmful. When the mind disagrees with the flow, it creates excess potential. With transurfing, however, another possibility exists. When you lower the level of your inner and outer importance, excess potential diminishes and obstacles virtually eliminate themselves. The same thing happens when you go around obstacles instead of resisting and fighting against them. And the more you do both, the more guiding signs can help you. The mind also has a tendency to regard events that do not seem to fit in its script as obstacles. The mind usually plans and calculates everything in advance, and if something unforeseen happens, the mind actively fights against it. As a result, the situation becomes worse. At that point, you have to give more freedom to the flow. After all, the flow is not interested in ruining your fate. It is the mind that ruins your fate with its ill-informed decisions and actions. From the mind's point of view, expediency is when everything is running according to the pre-designed script. Anything that doesn't agree with the script is perceived as an undesired problem, and problems have to be solved. A mission the mind embraces with diligence, but which only creates new problems. Think about it. When do people feel happy? When do they experience satisfaction? When are they satisfied with themselves? When everything goes according to plan. The smallest deviation from this script is seen as a failure. Inner importance won't allow the mind to accept the possibility of deviations. The mind thinks, after all, I've planned and calculated everything in advance. I know better what is good and what is bad for me. I'm being sensible. Life often gives gifts to people which they reluctantly receive only because these gifts are not part of their plan. I wanted a different toy. Reality is such that we hardly ever get just the toys we were planning to have. Other things come our way too, so we walk around gloomy and dissatisfied. Imagine how much more enjoyable life would be if the mind were to lower its levels of importance and recognize the rights of deviations to exist in the script. But because the mind is usually not willing to allow deviations in your script, it cannot use the ready solutions to problems in the streams of the flow of variations. The mind's manic tendency to keep everything under control turns life into a constant battle with the flow. It simply cannot allow the flow of variations to move on its own. And here we come to the mind's other great mistake. The mind wants to control not its movement along the flow of variations, but the flow itself. And from this comes almost all of our problems and unpleasant experiences. Real expediency, moving along the path of least resistance, cannot create problems or obstacles. Activate your overseer, and for the course of one day, observe how your mind tries to control the flow. Something is proposed to you, and you refuse. Someone tries to tell you something, and you wave it off. Someone expresses their opinion, and you argue against it. Someone does something his own way, and you set him on the right path. You wait for one thing, but get something completely different and express your dissatisfaction. Someone interferes with you, and you lose your temper. Something goes against your script, and you launch a frontal attack to redirect the flow of events. Instead, try to loosen your grip of control and grant more freedom to the flow. This does not mean agreeing to everything or accepting everything that is handed to you. Simply change your tactics. Shift your center of gravity away from control and to observation. Don't be in a rush to wave things off, to object, to argue, to state your opinion, to interfere, to control, or to criticize. Give the situation a chance to resolve itself without your active interference or resistance. You'll be, if not dumbfounded, then at least amazed, and something paradoxical will happen. Having refused control over situations, you will gain even more control than you had before. A detached observer always has a great advantage than a first-hand participant. When you look back, you'll become convinced that your control was against the flow. The suggestions of others make a lot of sense. Arguing is completely useless. Your interference is in vain. What you saw as obstacles are not obstacles at all. Problems resolve themselves just fine without your knowledge. Everything you got that you didn't plan for isn't that bad after all. Incidental phrases that were mentioned in passing turned out to be valid. Your inner discomfort served as a warning. You didn't waste excess energy. You remained satisfied. All of these are the magnificent gifts that I mentioned at the beginning of this book. But of course, you can't forget about pendulums. When you try to move with the flow of variations, pendulums want to make life difficult for you. They don't like streams in the flow because streams move in the direction of the least expenditure of energy, which means that you are now creating almost no excess potential and therefore not feeding pendulums. As a result, they have to try harder to reach you. But you know that the main remedy is always to control your level of inner and outer importance, and in that way, to remain free. Summary. The mind interprets information using a collection of well-established labels. The soul doesn't think and doesn't speak, but it feels and knows. The mind is only able to create a relatively new version of a new house out of old bricks. Entirely new discoveries come from unrealized sectors. The soul serves as a mediator between entirely new information and the mind. The soul accepts unrealized information as knowledge without interpretations. If the mind is successful in interpreting the soul's information, a discovery is made. The mind is capable of unambiguously determining the state of inner comfort. Train yourself to pay attention to your level of inner comfort. Having refused importance, you will get the freedom to choose your destiny. Freedom of choice allows you to stop asking, stop demanding, and stop struggling. It allows you to go and take whatever you want. The structure of information is arranged into chains of cause and effect links. Cause and effect links give rise to the flow of variations. The paths of least resistance are arranged into separate streams. Streams in the flow of variations have in themselves the solutions to all problems. Internal and external importance throw the mind out of the optimal stream. Everything is a lot easier than it seems. Give in to this simplicity. It is not omens that work, but your attitude toward them. Guiding signs point at possible turns in the flow of variations. Life tracks differ qualitatively from one another. Signs put us on alert because they appear during a transfer to another life track. Signs can be distinguished by their ability to create the feeling that something is not quite right. Spontaneous phrases can be perceived as clear instructions that you may act on. Inner discomfort is a clear sign. If you have to talk yourself into something, it means the soul is saying no. If you have the possibility to refuse an uncomfortable decision, refuse it. It's necessary to loosen your grip of control and accept unforeseen events in your script. Importance gets in the way of accepting the possibility of deviations in your script. The mind strives to control not its movement along the flow, but the flow itself. Move the center of gravity from control to observation. Having relinquished control, you will get real control over a situation. If you move along the flow of variations, the world will come out to greet you.